If I told you to look at a random rock on Earth that had some strange pattern on it, you would probably shrug and think there's nothing unusual going on because we see weird-looking rocks all the time. But if that same rock were sitting on Mars, the reaction would be completely different because Mars doesn't casually hand us surprises like that. That's exactly why this discovery feels so wild. NASA has never openly shared something quite like this before, especially not framed as a possible biosignature. So when scientists say this might mean something, people pay attention, even though they are being extremely careful with their words. What kicked all of this off was a rock sample collected by NASA's Perseverance rover from an ancient dry riverbed inside Jezero crater. This isn't just any location on Mars, because Jezero is known to be a place where water once flowed, pooled, and shaped the land. The sample came from a rock nicknamed Chayava Falls, and the core taken from it was officially labeled Sapphire Canyon. According to a study published in the journal Nature, this sample contains features that could preserve evidence of ancient microbial life. Not confirmed life, not fossils you can point to and say, that's it, but potential biosignatures, which is still a massive deal. A biosignature, in simple terms, is something that might have been created by life. It could be a chemical pattern, a structure, or a combination of materials that biology tends to produce. But here's the catch. The same thing can sometimes be made without life at all, just through chemistry and geology. That's why scientists refuse to jump to conclusions, even though the data is exciting. They need more evidence, more testing, and ideally the samples back on Earth before making any bold claims. Still, the significance of this moment wasn't downplayed by NASA leadership. Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy called it the closest humanity has ever come to discovering life on Mars. He emphasized that identifying a potential biosignature on the red planet is a breakthrough, because it pushes our understanding of Mars forward in a way nothing else has before. He also tied it into NASA's broader goals, pointing out that this kind of science supports future human missions to Mars, including the long-term ambition of putting astronauts on Martian soil. Perseverance didn't stumble onto this rock by accident. Back in July 2024, the rover was exploring an area known as the Bright Angel Formation. This region sits along the edges of Neretva Vallis, an ancient river valley about a quarter-mile wide that was carved by rushing water billions of years ago as it emptied into Jezero crater. In other words, Perseverance was exactly where scientists hoped it would be when looking for signs of past habitability, because flowing water is one of the biggest clues in the search for life. According to Nikki Fox from NASA's Science Mission Directorate, this discovery is a direct result of careful planning and mission design. Perseverance was built specifically to find this kind of evidence, so seeing a potential biosignature means the mission is doing precisely what it was meant to do. Once the study was peer-reviewed and published, NASA made all the data available to the global scientific community, because the next step is letting independent researchers test, question, and challenge the findings. That process is critical, even though it slows things down, because it's the only way to be confident about results this big. When Perseverance analyzed the rocks in the Bright Angel Formation, its instruments revealed that the sedimentary layers are made mostly of clay and silt. On Earth, those materials are excellent at preserving microbial life because they can trap organic matter and protect it over long periods of time. Even more interesting, the rocks were rich in organic carbon, sulfur, oxidized iron, and phosphorus. That combination immediately raised eyebrows because those elements are commonly linked to biological processes. Joel Horowitz, a Perseverance scientist and the lead author of the paper, explained that this mix of chemicals could have provided energy sources for microbial metabolisms. But even though the chemistry looked promising, that alone wasn't enough to label it a biosignature. The team had to dig deeper and figure out what those chemical signals actually meant, because Mars is full of surprises that can mimic life without involving biology at all. The first instruments to study Chayava Falls were Pixel and Sherlock. Pexel helps identify which elements are present in the rock, while Sherlock uses lasers to detect minerals and organic molecules. When these tools scanned the rock, which is about 1 meter long and shaped a bit like an arrowhead, they spotted unusual, colorful patches. These spots stood out because on Earth, similar patterns can be left behind when microbes consume available chemicals like organic carbon, sulfur, and phosphorus as energy sources. When the team looked at higher resolution images, things got even more interesting. The spots formed distinct mineral patterns arranged along reaction fronts, which are zones where chemical reactions take place. The scientists nicknamed these patterns leopard spots because of how they looked. These areas carried the signature of two iron-rich minerals, vivianite and greyite. On Earth, vivianite often shows up in sediments, peat bogs, and places where organic matter is breaking down. Greyite, meanwhile, can be produced by certain types of microbes as part of their metabolic processes. The pairing of these two minerals matters because they appear to form through electron transfer reactions between sediment and organic matter. That kind of reaction is exactly how some microbes generate energy to survive and grow. So when scientists see this pattern, it starts to look like a potential fingerprint of life. But, and this is a big but, both minerals can also form without life under the right conditions. High temperatures, acidic environments, or specific chemical catalysts can sometimes produce similar results. Here's where things get tricky for non-biological explanations. The rocks in the Bright Angel Formation don't show evidence of having been exposed to high temperatures or harsh acidic conditions. And while organic compounds can sometimes act as catalysts, it's unclear whether the ones found in this rock could have driven these reactions at low temperatures. That uncertainty doesn't prove life was involved, but it does make non-biological explanations less convincing. What really surprised scientists is that these rocks are relatively young compared to other formations studied by the mission. Before this, many researchers assumed that if Mars ever hosted life, the best evidence would be locked away in much older rocks. This finding suggests Mars may have remained habitable longer than previously thought, or that signs of life exist in multiple layers of the planet's history, even though they can be extremely subtle and hard to detect. Katie Stack Morgan, Perseverance's project scientist, stressed the importance of caution. Claims about extraterrestrial life require extraordinary evidence, and peer review is a critical part of that process. Even though abiotic explanations now seem less likely based on the data, they can't be completely ruled out. Science moves forward by eliminating possibilities one by one, not by declaring victory early. To help with that process, scientists use frameworks like the CoLD scale, which stands for Confidence of Life Detection. This scale outlines 7 benchmarks that gradually increase confidence that a set of observations truly indicates life. Sapphire Canyon currently sits somewhere on that scale, but it hasn't reached the highest levels yet. In other words, it's compelling, but not definitive. So far, Perseverance has collected 27 rock cores since landing in Jezero Crater in February 2021. Alongside its life detection tools, the rover also carries a weather station and materials designed to test how spacesuits hold up in Martian conditions. All of this ties into future human exploration, because understanding Mars today shapes how we prepare for missions tomorrow. The rover itself is managed by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, built under Caltech's oversight as part of NASA's broader Mars exploration program. But before anyone starts declaring that alien fossils have been found, it's worth remembering that we've been wrong before. The search for life on Mars spans decades, and it's full of moments that looked promising at first but didn't hold up under scrutiny. Back in 1976, NASA's Viking landers ran the first experiments designed to detect life on Mars. They added nutrients to Martian soil to see if anything would consume them, and when gas was released, excitement exploded. It looked exactly like microbial activity, until scientists realized that reactive chemicals in the soil could explain everything without involving life at all. As the years went on and new missions arrived, the picture of Mars became clearer. Rovers like Spirit and Opportunity showed that Mars was once covered in water, with rivers and lakes shaping its surface. Curiosity later confirmed that these watery environments could have supported life. Naturally, scientists began to suspect that fossil evidence might still be hiding in ancient lake beds, waiting to be found. That's where Perseverance comes in, armed with the most advanced tools ever sent to Mars. Pixel identifies elemental composition, while Sherlock detects minerals and organic compounds. When these instruments scanned the Sapphire Canyon sample, the results were exactly what scientists had hoped for. The mudstone contained organic molecules right where the strange spots appeared, and those spots were rich in iron, phosphorus, sulfur, vivianite, and greigite. On Earth, those minerals are often linked to decaying plant and animal matter, which made the data impossible to ignore. For over a year, researchers pushed this data as hard as they could. They tested alternative explanations, ran models, and challenged their own assumptions. Finally, after extensive peer review, they shared their conclusions. They couldn't find a better explanation for the observations. That doesn't mean life is confirmed, but it does mean this could be the clearest sign of ancient life ever found on Mars. What makes this so striking is that all three key ingredients for life showed up in one place: liquid water, organic molecules, and an energy source. That combination had never been found together in a single Martian sample before. It's like finding a campsite with a fire ring, ashes, and leftover food. Even if no one is there anymore, it strongly suggests someone once was. Scientists did consider other possibilities. The first was high-temperature geology, but vivianite only forms at low temperatures and would be destroyed by heat, so that explanation doesn't fit. The second idea involved acidic water, but the rock contains olivine, a mineral that acid would destroy, which rules that out. The third hypothesis suggested that organic molecules acted as catalysts, but there's no strong evidence that could happen under the conditions present. When you stack all of this together, ancient microbial life starts to look like the most plausible explanation. If microbes once lived in the mud of Jezero Lake, using iron and sulfur for energy, they could have left behind these leopard-like patterns as waste products. Over time, those signals would have been locked into stone as the mud hardened. So why don't scientists just say they found life? Because extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. There is no bigger claim than saying humans have discovered aliens, even microbial ones. To reach that level of certainty, the samples need to come back to Earth, where they can be studied with tools far more powerful than anything we can send to Mars. Until then, this discovery sits in a careful middle ground. Not proof, but not nothing either, and easily one of the most exciting clues we've ever found. All of this naturally leads to the next big question: what happens now, and how do we actually confirm whether this really is evidence of life? For discoveries like this, NASA relies on something called the Confidence of Life Detection Scale. It's basically a structured way to measure how strong the evidence really is, because not every exciting signal deserves the same level of confidence. The scale starts at level 1, which is simply detecting something that could be linked to life, and it goes all the way to level 7, where multiple independent observations of the same sample all point to the same conclusion. That final level would mean we're no longer talking about hints or possibilities, but genuine evidence of alien life. Right now, this particular discovery likely sits somewhere in the middle of that scale. NASA hasn't publicly assigned it an exact level, and that silence is intentional, because science works better when conclusions aren't rushed. But if the goal is to push this discovery toward level 7, there's really only one way to do it. We have to bring the sample back to Earth. The reason is simple, even though the technology behind it is anything but. No matter how advanced Perseverance is, and no matter how clever the instruments we send to Mars become, they still can't compete with the tools and expertise we have in laboratories here on Earth. Rovers operate with strict limits on power, size, and equipment. Earth-based labs don't have those limits. So while Perseverance has done everything it possibly can with this rock, there's nothing more we can extract remotely. To go further, scientists need physical access to the sample. That's where Mars sample return comes in. Perseverance has been quietly doing the first and arguably most important part of this mission, collecting and sealing samples over the last few years, like the world's most expensive delivery service. But returning them is incredibly hard. It takes 3 separate missions: one to collect and store the samples, another to launch them off the surface of Mars into orbit, and a third to capture them and bring them back to Earth. Because of that complexity, along with budget pressures, the program has spent years in limbo, even though multiple decadal surveys have ranked Mars sample return as NASA's top priority. Still, this moment feels different. If we're ever going to answer one of humanity's oldest questions, are we alone? This is how we do it. If everything works, sometime in the 2030s, we could be holding Mars in our hands. And if that sample confirms life once existed there, it wouldn't just change science. It would change how we see ourselves, how rare life really is, and maybe even how we treat our own fragile world. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.